Who am I? What is enlightenment? Socrates had told me, long ago, that even for the warrior, there is no victory over death. There is only the realization of who you really are. As I lay in the sun, I remembered peeling away the last layer of the onion in Soc's office, to see who I was. I remembered a character in a J.D. Salinger novel, who, upon seeing someone drink a glass of milk, said, "It was like pouring God into God, if you know what I mean." I remembered Lao Tzu's dream. Lao Tzu fell asleep, and dreamed he was a butterfly. Upon awakening, he asked himself, "Am I a man who has just been dreaming that he was a butterfly, or a sleeping butterfly, now dreaming that he is a man?" I walked down the beach, singing the children's nursery rhyme over and over. Row, row, row your boat gently down the stream, merrily, 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 life is but a dream. After one afternoon walk, I returned to my sheltered campsite, hidden behind some rocks. I reached into my pack, and took out an old book I'd picked up in India. It was a ragged English translation of spiritual folk tales. Flipping through the pages, I came upon a story about enlightenment. Milarepa had searched everywhere for enlightenment, but could find no answer, until one day, he saw an old man walking slowly down a mountain path, carrying a heavy sack. Immediately, Milarepa sensed that this old man knew the secret he had been desperately seeking for many years. Quote, "Old man, please tell me what you know. What is enlightenment?" The old man smiled at him for a moment, and swung the heavy burden off his shoulders, and stood straight. Quote, "Yes, see," cried Milarepa, "my everlasting gratitude. But please, one question more. What is after enlightenment?" Smiling again, the old man picked up the sack once again, slung it over his shoulders, steadied his burden, and continued on his way. That same night I had a dream. I am in darkness at the foot of a great mountain, searching under every stone for a precious jewel. The valley is covered in darkness, so I cannot find the jewel. Then I look up to the shining mountain peak. If the jewel is to be found, it must be at the top. I climb and climb, beginning an arduous journey that takes many years. At last I reach my journey's end. I stand bathed in the bright light. My sight is clear now, yet the jewel is nowhere to be found. I look upon the valley far below where I began the climb many years ago. Only then do I realize that the jewel had always been within me, even then, and that the light had always shined. Only my eyes were closed. I woke in the middle of the night, under a shining moon. The air was warm, and the world was silent, except for the rhythmic wash of the tides. I heard Soc's voice, but knew that it was only another memory. Enlightenment is not an attainment, Gan. It is realization, and when you wake up everything changes and nothing changes. If a blind man realizes he can see, has the world changed? Saturn watched the moonlight sparkling on the sea, and capping the distant mountains with silver. What was that saying about mountains, and rivers, and the great search? Ah, yes, I remembered. First mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. Then mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. Finally, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers. I stood, ran down the beach, and dove into the dark ocean, swimming out far beyond the surf. I had stopped to tread water, when I suddenly sensed a creature swimming through the black depths somewhere below my feet. Something was coming at me, very rapidly. It was death. I flailed wildly to the shore, and lay panting on the wet sand. A small crab crawled in front of my eyes, and burrowed into the sand as a wave washed over it. I stood, dried myself, and slipped into my clothes. I packed by the light of the moon. Then, shouldering my knapsack, said to myself, better never begin. Once begun, better finish. I knew it was time to go home. As the jumbo jet settled onto the runway at Hopkins Airport in Cleveland, I felt a growing anxiety about my marriage and my life. Over 6 years had passed. I felt older, but no wiser. What could I say to my wife and my daughter? Would I ever see Socrates again? And if I did, what could I bring to him? Linda and Holly were waiting for me when I got off the plane. Holly ran to me squealing with delight, and hugged me tight. My embrace with Linda was soft and warm, but empty of real intimacy, like hugging an old friend. It was obvious that time and experience had drawn us in different directions. Linda drove us home from the airport. Holly slept contentedly on my lap. Linda had not been lonely in my absence, I learned. She had found friends and intimacies. And as it happened, soon after my return to Oberlin I met someone very special, a student, a sweet young woman named Joyce. Her short black hair hung in bangs over a pretty face and bright smile. She was small and full of life. I felt intensely attracted to her, and we spent every available hour together, walking and talking, strolling through the Arboretum grounds, around the placid waters. I was able to talk with her in a way I'd never been able to speak with Linda, not because Linda couldn't understand, but because her paths and interests lay elsewhere. Joyce graduated in the spring. She wanted to stay near me, but I felt a duty to my marriage, so we sadly parted. I knew I'd never forget her, but my family had to come first. In the middle of next winter, Linda, Holly and I moved back to Northern California. Perhaps it was my preoccupation with my work and with myself that was the final blow to our marriage, but no omen had been so sad as the continual nagging doubt and melancholy I first felt on our wedding night, that painful doubt, that sense of something I should remember, something I'd left behind me years ago. Only with Joyce had I felt free of it. After the divorce, Linda and Holly moved into a fine old house. I lost myself in my work teaching gymnastics and Aikido at the Berkeley YMCA. The temptation to visit the gas station was agonizing, but I would not go until I was called. Besides, how could I go back? I had nothing at all to show for my years. I moved to Palo Alto and lived alone, as lonely as I had ever been. I thought of Joyce many times, but knew I had no right to call her. I still had unfinished business. I began my training anew. I exercised, read, meditated, and continued driving questions deeper and deeper into my mind, like the sword. In a matter of months, I started to feel a renewed sense of well-being that I hadn't felt in years. During this time, I started writing, recording volumes of notes from my days with Socrates. I hoped my review of our time together would give me a fresh clue. Nothing had really changed, at least nothing I could see, since he had sent me away. One morning, sat on the front steps of my small apartment, overlooking the freeway, I thought back over the past 8 years. I had begun as a fool, and had almost become a warrior. Then Socrates had sent me out into the world to learn, and I had become a fool again. It seemed a waste, all 8 years. So here I sat on the front steps, gazing over the city to the mountains beyond. Suddenly my attention narrowed, and the mountains began to take on a soft glow. In that instant, I knew what I would do. I sold what few belongings I had left, strapped my pack to my back, and hitched it south toward Fresno, then headed east into the Sierra Nevadas. It was late summer, a good time to get lost in the mountains. You, on the other hand, he grinned, looking me over, look a lot older, and not much smarter. Tell me, did you learn anything? Sighed, staring into the fire. Well, I learned to make my own tea. I put a small pot of water on my makeshift grill, and prepared the spicy tea, using herbs I'd found on my hike that day. I hadn't been expecting company. I handed him my cup, and poured my tea into a small bowl.